Hey, welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome. I'm really glad that you're watching. It's good to have you here. As usual, when I start these things I want to talk about, these are my views, okay? They're not particularly saying anything on behalf of any particular sect or denomination or whatever else. These are just the things that I feel. So, I want to ask you a question. Right at the start here, right at the outset, and I want you to think about it maybe for a second before I move on. But so, when did you last think of Jesus Christ? And I don't mean during a meeting, a religious meeting particularly, or during a Bible reading, or during a prayer. No, I'm talking more about when Jesus crosses your mind on a fairly average Tuesday afternoon, if you like, always Tuesdays. When you were stuck in traffic, maybe, or when a colleague said something that irritated you, when you were deciding possibly whether to tell the full truth in a difficult conversation. Because, here's what I believe, and what I want to spend the next 15 or so minutes unpacking with you today is that the remembrance of Jesus was never meant to be an hour on a Sunday morning. It was meant to be a life, a whole life, 7 days a week, every interaction, every decision, and every response that we make. And today I want to get really practical about what that actually looks like. Now, I grew up in a Christadelphian community, but I'm still part of it. And that we have a breaking of bread. We call it a memorial meeting. And it's the very heart of the way the Christadelphians worship. We gather around the Lord's table every Sunday and do what Jesus asked us to do. We eat the bread and drink the cup and we remember Him. And that's precious. It's irreplaceable. I'm not diminishing it for a single moment. But I want us to think carefully about the word remember. Now, in the Greek and the New Testament, the word, you have to bear with me because I'm not very good with languages, but the word used is anamensis. And it doesn't mean simply to recall a fact, the way you might remember a phone number, for example, or your PIN numbers or something, but it means to be fully present, to make it live again, to enact it. So when Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me," He was saying that what I am and what I did become present in you. Live it. Let it be active. Let it shape you. Now the breaking of bread is, meant to be the weekly refueling point, if you like, but it's not the whole journey at all. And I'm pretty sure that when Jesus said that at the Last Supper, He wasn't thinking about a weekly meeting. He wasn't thinking about something that is almost bordering on tradition in some places. And I think we have to be careful of that. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11 that every time that we eat bread and we drink the cup, we proclaim the Lord's death until He comes. That word proclaim, it's a public word, isn't it? You proclaimed something in public, an outward word. It implies that it has visible consequences in our lives. So the question becomes, how does our remembrance spill out of the meeting room and into Monday morning? Now, the Apostle Peter, who knew Jesus personally, didn't he? He knew him really well. He'd walked with Him, he'd ate with Him, he'd argued with Him, wrote these words in his first letter: "Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so you might follow in His steps." So, I'm going to do it again, another Greek word, and this is the Greek word for example, which is hypogrammos. It literally means a tracing pattern. Like the letter templates that a child uses to learn how to, form the letters, the shape of the letters that they're going to use when they're learning to write. You place a template underneath and you trace it. The shape of the letter is already there. Your job is to follow it as closely as you can. Jesus is our hippogramus, the tracing pattern, if you like, for a human life. And here's what makes this both inspiring and, I suppose, also deeply challenging. Jesus didn't live an extraordinary life of living outside of extraordinary circumstances. He lived in very ordinary circumstances, didn't he? He had such an ordinary life, but he lived it extraordinarily. He went to weddings, he ate meals, he had conversations with strangers at wells, he slept in a boat, he dealt with difficult people, including his closest friends, he faced injustice at work, and he was misunderstood by his family. But, Jesus, he expressed himself not by escaping the ordinary life, but by inhabiting it differently. And that is the arena, if you like, in which we need to remember him, not just at the table, but at the kitchen table. Not just at the meeting, but at the meeting with a difficult colleague. Not just in prayer, but in the moment when we decide how to respond to someone who has wronged us. So let's get practical, I suppose. I mean, genuinely practical here, not vague spiritual advice. And I suppose the first thing that I'm going to say is I'd encourage us to have an intentional morning. Jesus regularly reduced to pray, didn't he? Before the demands of the day began, Luke tells us he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. Not because the rest of the day wasn't going to be important, no, but because prayer shaped the rest of the day. It doesn't have to be an hour, it could be 10 minutes, but the practice of beginning the day with a deliberate thought about Jesus, not just a general prayer, but a specific reflection, if you like, makes an enormous difference. The question I use personally, I suppose, could be framed as, what is Jesus going to ask of me today that I might be tempted to walk past? Because that's usually what it is, isn't it? Not a dramatic test, not a fiery trial, just a moment when serving or noticing or speaking honestly, or even just being patient, would cost us something and we're tempted to walk past it. So let's begin the day expecting those moments, name them before they arrive, and when they come, and they will. Every day has its own trials. You're more likely to recognize them as opportunities to trace the pattern. One of the most consistent patterns in the Gospels is that Jesus noticed people that everyone else had made invisible. The lepers, the others crossed the street to avoid, the tax collector up a tree that the crowd walked under without looking up, the woman who touched the hem of his garment in a crowd. Everyone was pressing around him, but he stopped and asked, "Who touched me?" Because someone in genuine need had reached out, and he will not let that go unnoticed. Because remembering Jesus means recovering that habit of noticing. Do you have invisible people in your week? The cleaner at your workplace, maybe, whose name you've never learned. The checkout assistant who scans your groceries without anyone making eye contact with them. The elderly neighbour who hasn't spoken very much to anybody since their spouse died. The person at the meeting, your meeting, if you're Christadelphian, your ecclesia possibly, who sits near the back and goes home quickly when nobody really knows or thought about them. A simple concrete practice, learn one new name each week for someone you normally wouldn't notice. That's it. Just learn one name. Remember it. Ask it, of course. Remember it. Use it next time. It costs almost nothing. But in some ways, it's one of the most Christ-like things you can do. Because to Jesus, no one was background scenery. And we read in Colossians 3:23, Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Jesus, we know, was a carpenter. Before he was a public teacher, he worked with wood like his father had. He spent the majority of his life doing ordinary work. And we can be quite sure that every piece of furniture he built was built properly, every joint, every measurement, not because someone was checking, but because integrity. He had that integrity, and it's as simple as that. It's simply who he was. I think remembering Jesus, bringing that integrity to your work, your finances, your conversations. I guess some practical examples would be if you're in a meeting, you could take credit for someone else's idea and they're not in the room. What do you do? When you make an error at work and it's the kind that probably won't be traced back to you, do you correct it or leave it? When a shop gives you too much change, do you give it back? These feel like small things, don't they? And I suppose individually they are. But they are the texture of life, and the texture that either reflects Jesus or it doesn't. So here's a good test. Would you be comfortable if Jesus could see exactly what you're doing right now? Not frightened, because there's no condemnation for those in Christ. But comfortable, at ease? Would you feel that your actions are consistent with being his disciple? That question asked correctly is a powerful form of remembrance. And I fail all the time. But we've got to keep on trying, right? I guess now this is possibly the hardest, and maybe if you're honest you'll agree with me here. But it's how we respond to someone when they wrong us. Because how we respond when somebody wrongs us is probably the most revealing test of how deeply we're actually remembering Jesus. Peter, who had himself been forgiven more than most anyone, writes, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Jesus, under accusation, under mockery, under physical pain, he didn't retaliate, did not plot revenge, did not build a case against his accusers, trusted God with the outcome. Now, I'm not suggesting that we never address conflict. Jesus himself gave us a clear process for that in Matthew 18. Healthy, honest, direct conversation is not the opposite of gentleness. It can be the highest expression of it. But what we're talking about here is the spirit in which we engage, okay? So maybe there are 3 concrete practices for handling conflict in a Christ-like way. First, the 24-hour rule. Before you respond to something that's genuinely upset you, an email, a conversation, a perceived slight, wait 24 hours if you can. Not to suppress it, but to pray about it and let the heat come down a little. Then secondly, pray specifically for the person who has wronged you. Not a vague general prayer, but specifically, Lord, please bless this person today. It's almost impossible to maintain bitterness towards someone you are genuinely praying for. And third, ask yourself, what does this person need from me right now? Not what does they deserve, not what you would feel satisfying to say, but what do they need? That question moves you from reaction to compassion, and compassion is the very nature and the reflex of our Lord. Another way, I suppose, is we see in Luke chapter 8 that it tells us about a group of women, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna and others, and they supported Jesus and his disciples out of their own means. Generosity was woven into the fabric of the first community that was gathered around Jesus. And Jesus himself was extravagantly generous, not just with healing, but with time, with attention, with himself. He ate with people, he invited himself to his house. He spent whole evenings in conversation when he was exhausted. There's lots of ways of being generous, you know. Generosity is one of the clearest ways we embody the character of Jesus in everyday life. And here's the thing about biblical generosity. It's not primarily about money at all. Oh, it does include that. It's about giving what it costs you. It's about giving when it costs you something to give. Time is often harder to find than money, and harder to give. Attention can be harder than time. The willingness to sit with someone in their grief, when you don't know what to say, but you just stay anyway. That is the kind of generosity in remembering Jesus. Now, a practical suggestion: choose one act of intentional generosity each week. Write it down on a Sunday after the breaking of bread, or whenever makes sense for you. Make it specific. Not I'll be more generous this week, but on Tuesday I'm going to cook a meal for the family who just moved in nearby, or something like that. Something specific, something planned, costly enough to mean something. We remember Jesus not just as someone who lived and died, but as someone who is coming back. We believe this remembrance of him that we do in the breaking of bread is explicitly looking forward. It's a forward-looking act, if you like, and as well as a backward-looking one. Paul says she proclaims the Lord's death until he comes. That until changes everything. If Jesus is returning to establish his kingdom on this earth, a literal, physical, glorious kingdom, and centered in Jerusalem, where justice will finally prevail and creation itself will be renewed, then the way we live now is not just personal discipline. It's preparation. It's practice. It's citizenship of a kingdom that hasn't fully arrived yet, but that we are called to embody in our communities right now and our personal behavior right now. Every act of justice in your workplace is a small reflection of the kingdom. Every moment of mercy shown to someone who doesn't deserve it is a preview of the King. Every time you choose integrity over convenience, you are declaring that the values of that coming age matter today. We're not just remembering a past saviour, No. We are living in anticipation of a coming King. And that vision held clearly makes every day significant. Every interaction meaningful. Every choice weighted with the gravity of eternity. So let me bring this back to where we started, the breaking of bread on the Sunday morning. Yep, it's the anchor point. It's the moment when we sit before the most concentrated symbol of what Jesus gave, his body, his blood, and his life. And we say, I remember, I am grateful, and I am recommitted. But then we leave the room. The question is, do we carry him with us? When we notice the person that no one else is noticing, we carry him with us. When we tell the truth even when it costs us something, we carry him with us. When we respond to provocation with patience instead of retaliation, we carry him with us. When we give generously of our time, our attention, or our resources, we carry him with us. When we begin each day asking what he might ask of us, we carry him with us. This is what living remembrance looks like. Not a performance, not spiritual perfectionism, just ordinary people, just us, just ordinary circumstances. And asking every day, what would it look like right now to trace the pattern? Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Keeping his commandments isn't separate from remembering him. It is the form that remembrance takes when it grows up. May our remembrance of him grow with us this week. May we walk with it in everything we do. And may the people around us who may never read a Bible or sit at a breaking of bread see something in us that makes them wonder who it is that we're following. Because, that's probably the most powerful testimony of all. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. If it's been a help or encouraging, please share it with somebody or leave me a comment. I'd genuinely love to hear how you personally try to remember Jesus in your everyday life. So, until next time, God willing, God bless, take care.